Well, it's good to be here with you today. We are continuing in our series on paradise, and we have some bonus questions that we want to deal with and throw out and maybe see if we can get some insight on some of these extra applicable questions regarding paradise. Like, here's the first one. Will there be marriage and sex in heaven? Yep, we're diving right into it. I'm gonna kind of stay careful here, and I'm just gonna go with this, which I think is the main thing we can really look to in Scripture. Jesus was having a conversation, really a debate with the Sadducees, and the Sadducees had their own special kind of theology. And one of their issues was they wanted to understand if a woman had been married to a number of men, maybe 4 or 5 different men in her lifetime, whose wife would she be in heaven? Jesus basically kind of rebuked them and said, you guys are ignoramuses, for lack of a better word. He said, you fools, you have to understand that there is no marriage in heaven. They are not given in marriage, and they do not marry. They are like the angels. And so we know from this, for example, that angels themselves are genderless and no marriage in heaven. So some of you are rejoicing, some of you are bummed out. I understand. We're not going to go into that. We're just going to go with that basic answer. What does it mean that after death, everyone will face judgment? This is a biblical statement. The Scripture is very clear on this. The Scripture says it is appointed for man to die once, and then comes judgment. And the fact that everyone will be judged has to do with the issue of who we are, part of our nature. We have a sin nature, unfortunately. We also have a nature in which God created us originally, and that was in His image. And so those two natures are in conflict with each other, and the only way to actually solve that problem is for God Himself to take away that old sin nature and to redeem the original nature. And so what it comes down to as far as judgment is simply this. Who does God see when you go to the judgment throne? Does He see you? That's not going to be a good situation for you. So if He sees you, then He sees your sin nature. And that's not going to work out real well. That means judgment in hell. But if He sees Christ, then that judgment will be averted, and you will actually go to heaven. And it comes down to that. That's the judgment. The judgment isn't whether you did good enough things, what number of good enough things did you do. The judgment is simply this. Does God see Jesus, or does God see you? And so this is the issue of judgment, and it's true. All will face that judgment. Will there be animals in heaven? This, of course, is one of the favorite question of many people regarding paradise or heaven. I believe that there actually will be animals in heaven. There is a couple of scriptures in the Old Testament, for example, in Isaiah, that talk about the lamb, or actually the translation is the wolf and the lion will lie down together, and there will not be any conflict. Talking about no violence in heaven, making that point. But in order to make that point, it actually says that there will be these animals in heaven. I think the bigger or the more direct answer to this question comes really from Genesis, is God made man, and on the same day He made man, He made animals. And so animals and men, people, lived in the Garden of Eden together before the fall. We know that because we know that man lived in the garden before he fell. And so if he lived in the garden before he fell and the animals were created along with him, then the animals lived in the garden before he fell. The whole idea of paradise and the new heaven and the new earth, the new heaven and the new earth, is that what was meant to be and what was originally in its perfection is now brought back or redeemed to become that which was always meant to be. So the new heaven and the new earth are actually the Garden of Eden before the fall. And so if animals were there before the fall in the garden in paradise, then they will be there after the total redemption of that and the new heavens and the new earth. Let's see. what will we look like in heaven? This one's probably the toughest question. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I have some hopes for myself, but again, I'm not going to go into that. But what will I look like in heaven? Here's the one thing that we do know. I think this is the way to answer this question, as well as other questions that regard appearance, and physical attributes. I think we have to look to the first fruits. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that Jesus is the first fruits. That is, he's the first one to rise from the dead in the sense of being dead and conquering death and taking on that new body. And we know he has some kind of new body because he's able to do different things after he rises from the dead. He seemingly disappears randomly. He seemingly goes through walls, goes through doors. People don't recognize him sometimes. And I think that gives us a clue as to perhaps what we will look like. Here's what my take on this. Mary comes to the tomb. Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. He's actually standing there at the tomb, and Mary sees him, but she does not recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener, and she's kind of conversing with him, and she doesn't recognize him. And all of a sudden, Jesus just stops, and he looks at her, and he says, "Mary." And in that moment, the scripture says her eyes, in a sense, were open, and she knew it was the Lord. Why? Why? I think the reason why is in 1 Corinthians 15, also says this about the first fruits. It says that you will be the immortal. The mortal will put on the immortal. The perishable will put on the imperishable, and the natural will put on the spiritual. And so your new body is going to be a spiritual body. And what does that mean? We have a natural body now. It doesn't mean we don't have a spirit. It just means that our physical body is primary to our spiritual body, our spirit. And so in a sense, for you to see my spirit, you have to see me through my body, my physical body. I think what happens is our new bodies, things get inverted, and your physical body becomes secondary and your spirit becomes primary. And so in order to see your physical body, you have to see that through the spirit of that person. And so Jesus connects with Mary on a kind of a spiritual level, and suddenly through his spirit, she sees his body. And so my conclusion on that is that you're going to basically look the same physically as you look now, but you're going to look very different in the sense that your spiritual body or your spirit is going to be primary relative to your physical body. Let's look at another one. What is a healthy way to talk about loved ones who die, who most likely were not saved? This is a difficult question, of course, and it's a sensitive question. And I don't think we necessarily have to put ourselves in an awkward position, feeling like, how do we talk about this? What do we say? I don't want to say that my loved one went to hell. Yet you might feel like in assessing the situation based on the criteria that you know about salvation, that perhaps they did. I don't think you have to put yourself in that awkward position for one main reason. You're not the judge anyway. And there's no way for you to know completely what that person did, even perhaps at the very last moments of their life. And that's a good thing. We don't have to take that upon ourselves. I think that's the way to answer this question. How should we talk about our loved ones who might not be saved? Is we don't have to put that heavy on ourselves. And I don't think we should. And I think it's proper to simply talk about that in the sense of what salvation is. And if that person was saved, then they're with God. And you don't have to go any further than that, I don't think. All right, let's talk about something right now that I think is very interesting. A lot of people like to know about, and I'm going to expound on this a little bit more so, and that is, what are angels, and what will our interaction with angels be? Angels, first of all, let's talk about what angels are not. Okay, angels are not God, and the other thing angels are not has to do with you. You're not an angel. Some people have a picture of heaven, and their basic picture of heaven is kind of sitting on a cloud with wings on and strumming a harp. Although that might sound very comfortable, I don't know that that has much of anything to do with what heaven is. and it kind of pictures you as becoming an angel. And a lot of people have that belief. That is totally unbiblical. You are not an angel. Angels are very specific and unique creations of God. In fact, they were created before the world began. According to a scripture in Job, that's exactly what it says. It says that these angels watched while God created the entire world. And so you have these angels who were specifically, the scripture says in Hebrews, created, get this, to minister to you. The word angel is a word that means messenger, and oftentimes these angels, it says in Hebrews 13, might even come as those that you don't even know are angels. It says, be hospitable to people, because you might be entertaining angels unaware. These angels are there to minister to you, to serve you. They're like secret agents. And it's an amazing thing to think about that angels are real and they're actually inferior to you. They're there to serve you. Now, having said that, we do know that angels are very powerful. We understand that. In that sense, you could say they're superior to us. And scripture in Psalms says that we are lower than the angels, in the sense that we are not nearly as powerful as the angels. I mean, sometimes we think we're superheroes. We want to be superheroes. And I think the angels make the superheroes, look like Flintstones or something. I mean, they're amazing, the power. What superhero would you want to be? That's a question we don't have here, but it's a common question too. Myself, I want to be Dart Boy. Dart Boy is the best that you could be, because Dart Boy, he flies, but he's like a bug. He goes everywhere. Boom, boom, boom. Angels are like that. There's that kind of description of them in heaven, but they're way greater than Dart Boy or any superhero. So they're very powerful in that sense. Psalm says we're lower than the angels, but we're actually in our nature superior to the angels. First of all, they serve us. Second of all, the scripture says that we will judge them. And so the angels are inferior to us, although they're so powerful. Let's talk a little bit about their characteristics. General characteristics of angels: they have a free will. And we know this because one of the major angels early on fell from heaven after he, in his free will, Lucifer, decided to rebel against God. And he took 1/3 of the angels with him. They what we call now demons. And they all did that in their free will. They made free will decisions to do that. I don't know exactly how to explain all the ramifications of that, but we do know that about angels. They have a free will. They're spirit beings. They're not physical beings. Now, they can manifest themselves in order to help us and interact with us in physical form, but they're not physical beings. They're spirit beings. Another thing we know from talking about the marriage issue, they're genderless. The scripture says that we aren't going to be given in marriage nor taken in marriage. We're like the angels. In other words, the implication there is that the angels are genderless. Angels as well are immortal. They go on. Even the angels, the fallen angels that will be judged, Lucifer himself, Satan himself, who will be put in the pit, they will still exist. They will just exist in a place that you and I don't even want to talk about. Activities. What are some of the activities of angels? I think one of the major activities of angels is worship. There seems to be a hierarchy of angels. There's cherubim, there's seraphim, there's even an archangel, Michael, and so there seems to be this hierarchy amongst themselves, but part of that hierarchy is they do different things. And so the cherubim worship God constantly. Must be a great job. So that's one of the major activities of angels, is worship. Of course, the most general activity of angels that you would say is what God says of them when he talks about creating them, and that is that they are there to do his bidding. They're his ministers. They are there for God's purposes, and they do what God tells them to do. And one of those things that they do sometimes is communicate. They communicate. We see this all throughout the scriptures. Angels appear, especially at the birth of Christ, and they become what we call heralds or proclaimers, and they proclaim something of truth or something of an announcement. And so that's one of the activities of angels as well. Another activity of angels is judgment. They execute God's judgment, and that's a scary thing, because when you watch some of the execution of judgment that angels are involved in, you know you don't want to be involved in that. How do we interact with angels? How will we interact with angels? Let's start there. I think, first of all, it should be said that whatever the activities of angels are currently are going to be the same activities of angels in the new heaven and earth. Why? Because angels they do not change. They're not redeemed. They're not saved. They do not change. So they're going to be doing the same thing. So in heaven, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Okay, so they're worshipers. Maybe the way we'll interact with them is they'll be our worship leaders. That would be pretty cool. That's a serious worship leader right there. They communicate. So I don't know exactly how that'll pan out, but I think they'll continue to do that activity in heaven. They'll be a constant communicator to us. Maybe they'll replace Facebook, and there'll be that constant communication from God that would be awesome to have. They're not people. They're beings that serve man, and so in heaven, that will be going on as well. They will be serving us. I don't know, it may be more intense. You might say, we'll have our own valet or our own butler, and the angels will be, I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I know they'll be serving us in heaven because that's their activity now, and they do not change, and that will continue to go on. Let's talk, as we kind of wrap this up and move toward a close here, let's talk a little bit about experiencing angels. Can we experience them now? The scripture is actually pretty clear on this. Yes, we can. We see them. We see people experiencing angels throughout the scripture. And the scripture in Hebrews 13 also tells us, again, to be hospitable to strangers because you might be entertaining angels unaware. In other words, you might experience them more than you know. When we lived in Uganda, my family and I, we were missionaries in Uganda. Actually, let me tell first the story about when we lived in Zaire. We were missionaries in Zaire, and it was a pre-Civil War situation. The country was breaking down. Things were going crazy. It was a very dangerous and violent time. I would go out of my compound and leave my wife and my two little tiny children behind because I was on my way to do a conference or seminar teaching pastors. And there'd be helicopters overhead with people with machine guns shooting at other people, buses overturned on fire in the street. I'd go out of my compound, there'd be a 13-year-old kid there in the Army with an Uzi submachine gun, and he would just be standing there as if he was going to have the wisdom to know what to do with that gun. Anyway, saying all that, to say it was getting me a little bit concerned. And I kind of went to God and not so much challenging God, but went to God and saying, God, am I doing the right thing? Should I take my family and leave this situation? Am I putting them in danger? I was very concerned. I woke up one night, in the middle of the night, and I'm one of those guys, at least then, we'd sleep like a log. I never woke up in the night. I woke up in the middle of the night, boom. I just, like this. It was the most peaceful thing I've ever experienced or ever have experienced, at least yet, until I get to heaven. It was just like I was in a bubble of unbelievable peace. And I was like, just sitting there going, what is this, God? And I turned over here and I looked at this little wicker shelf we had, and there were these two beings sitting on there. One was pretty large, not larger than a large man, but a very large type of person or being. And in between his legs was sitting this little tiny guy. And they just sat there and smiled. And I was sitting there looking at them. I knew I was awake. There wasn't an issue with that. I knew I was awake. I processed all that. I slapped myself, whatever it was. And I said to God, what is this? Who is this? And God said, these are my angels that are there to protect you, and I have hundreds of these circling around your compound. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. I said, well, that was good. I said, this is great. I literally just laid back down and went right back to sleep. And I'll never forget that. And that's something we can take from our study on angels is you can know that God has protection for you. And you can feel a safety in general with regard to things because he has his angels. There are a lot more of them than you know. And he has them there. And that's one of their jobs, to minister to us or to serve us, is to protect us. It was like my eyes were open with the servant of Elisha in the scripture in Kings, where it talks about Elisha's servant's eyes were open because there was this fear going on. And he looked, and there were just myriads of chariots on fire and beings, and they were there protecting the people from this ensuing war that was going to happen. When we were in Uganda, we were missionaries in Uganda, we had a friend that came to visit, and I wanted to take him and see some things. So when you go see some things in Uganda, it's a little bit different than seeing things here. There's not too much to see in the sense that we think of it, like let's go to this place, this way. So you go and you see some of the surroundings and the countryside and the different things that you might look at, like a jungle area, which we took him to, and we were just driving through this kind of jungle area. And it was you're just on a little dirt road, not even a dirt road, like a path. And we had a double cabin pickup truck, and my wife was pregnant. We had our 3 or 4 kids, and my friend Dan was there. And we were showing him around. It was interesting. All of a sudden, we turned to this corner, and there was this pit. It was literally a pit of mud. And the front end of the truck just almost dove into this pit. Now, this is a huge truck. This is a heavy truck, big engine. And I just have myself, my little kids, my pregnant wife, and my friend Dan. And we get out and we look at it, and we're getting in the mud, and we're like, how in the world are we going to get this thing out of the mud? And, we're trying to rev the truck, nothing. In fact, it's making it worse. So we're just like, so we're sitting there and we're thinking, this is bad. I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere in some jungle, and I don't know what we're going to do with this truck. All of a sudden, this guy just comes out of the jungle. He comes out of the surrounding area. We don't even know exactly where he came from. He just kind of almost appeared. He comes walking up. He says, I will help you. And he looks like a Ugandan guy. And I'm like, but he's like a very thin guy. It wasn't like, the Incredible Hulk comes walking up and, okay, he's going to pick up the truck. So we all just got on the truck, and next thing you know, somehow the truck came out of the mud and we got the thing out. And then the guy just said, goodbye, thank you. and he kind of not disappeared, but he just kind of walked away. And we just were amazed at that and thought, we didn't think anything of it actually like what we concluded later on. But later on, we talked about it, we're like, you know what? Was that an angel? And it very well may have been. And we should have done a little bit more hospitality with him. Hebrews 13 says, be hospitable to strangers. They might be entertaining angels unaware. But we actually had already eaten our lunch. We didn't have much of anything else. So, and he just was satisfied to just go walk away. But that very well might have been, he might have very well been an angel. Final thing I want to say to you before I just throw out a few applicational issues to think about is this issue with regard to angels. It goes back to our first characteristic of angels. That is, they have a free will. Because they have a free will, there are good angels and there are bad angels. Those angels that use their free will to go against God. And so we have to be very careful here about this. Yes, we can experience angels, the good angels, and that could be very helpful to us, and God uses them. But we also have to understand that there are fallen angels. We call them demons, and there's Satan himself. And the scripture says about these characters that they can masquerade, it says, as ministers of righteousness, angels of light. In other words, they're very deceptive. And so we have to be very careful with regard to the way we look at even wanting to experience angels, because we can be easily deceived by these very deceptive beings. And so that's something to consider. So just real quick, 5 points and we'll end here. Number 1, from what we know about angels, don't worship them. They're not God. In fact, they're inferior to you. Do not worship angels. Number 2, feel safe, feel help. Now, I understand that angels aren't always protecting you all the time, but there is that dynamic that we know about angels, and it's something to think about. Not that we're trusting in the angels, but we're trusting in God's provision to use angels to protect and help us. Number 3, be inspired. I think this is a wonderful application, maybe that we don't think about as much. But if many of these angels are just perfect worshipers of God, have that picture. There's nothing wrong with that picture. Picture those cherubim with their wings, and they're just kind of flittering around, and they're just worshiping God constantly, day and night. That's an inspirational thought. That's an inspirational picture for us to worship God as well. So let it be an inspiration to you. And also, one other thing that we've already mentioned here several times, maybe our study of angels makes us to be more hospitable people. I think that's what Hebrews 13 is saying. It actually says, be sure to show hospitality to angels because you may be entertaining angels unaware. And so it might help us to be more hospitable. And then finally, this one that I ended with just now, I just want to reiterate, be careful. Fallen angels are very deceptive, and you might think you had an interaction with an angel, and it might be something that is actually rooted in something of a demonic activity. And so be very careful of that and be discerning. All right, so there you have it. Angels, what they are, and a little bit about angels, how we interact with them. It's a big part of paradise because they are those spirit beings that are in heaven. And so I think it's a helpful thing just to think about them and know a little bit about them. Thank you.